they said, that's a problem. The internet's down again, you know? And we were just despairing. And I could hear, you know, one of my young colleagues in there shouting through this bad phone connection, trying to figure out. They found there's one Western hotel in Addis, which I think is basically where all the development people go, you know, and they go there. And it had internet in the lobby. We figured problem solved. The first 3 people who went in got kicked out. They were young black people, so they were not so welcome. We finally found a white person who went in and sat at the bar and ordered a drink and pressed the button on the computer. And a few minutes later, we had this unbelievable picture of 15,000 people in Addis Ababa with these huge, and, you know, we got it up on CNN soon after that, and then these pictures just started to rumble in from every corner of the world. And I hope people will might take a moment to go to 350.org and look at them, because if nothing else, it was all worth doing to make one point, which is that line that you sometimes hear from people about how environmentalism is something for rich white people is a complete lie. Almost, you know, the vast majority of pictures were of poor, black, brown, Asian young people, because that's the vast majority of people on Earth, you know? And of course they're just as concerned about the future as, why wouldn't they be, as anybody else. There's 25,000 pictures in the Flickr account, but you don't have to look through them all, a few will suffice. The one thing, if we figured out anything about organizing that was a little different, and as I say, we're completely clueless and making it up as we go along, but if we figured out anything, is that the architecture of the world has changed a little bit. When we first started, people said, oh, you should do a March on Washington. That's how this is done, when we were first doing Step It Up. And we were like, A, there's something off about telling people to drive across America to protest global warming, and B, this isn't how the world works anymore. If you do a March on Washington, nobody covers it. It's old hat, been done. The senators assume that everybody there comes from Washington or the Upper West Side, and they pay no attention. Anyway, we don't need to. We live in a world where you can do distributed action of all kinds, and then bring it together to make it more than the sum of its parts. That day in October, we were in Times Square. We took over one end of Times Square and took a bunch of those jumbotrons, and instead of showing vodka ads, for a few hours they were showing just this endless stream of pictures as people were uploading them from all over the world.
How did you get them to do that?
We paid them money, and it was hard to come by, but you know, it was worth it, because we had people there as they were going up taking pictures in turn of all this, and we were emailing them back, and you know, we'd hear from people in the Congo or whatever, you know, we had like children in Maasai, Kenya, you know, and just a tribal land, doing unbelievable stuff, and we would send them back these pictures of themselves 50 feet tall on the advertising signs in Times Square, and they were just flipping out, you know. It was just like so cool.
Now we're going to open up this discussion to all of you, so get ready with your questions. But so that's October. December is Copenhagen. There's tremendous excitement. Thousands of people come from all over the globe, not just the government officials. Unlike the World Trade Organization protests of 10 years before, where it was people shutting down this international organization on the outside, this was people on the outside and on the inside. They felt like this was their meeting. They did not want to shut it down at the beginning. They wanted this to happen. They wanted there to be a global agreement. So what happened?
Well, power happened, you know. Look, I mean, in some ways, it was a resounding triumph of organizing. We got, before the 2 weeks it was out, we had 117 countries that signed on to this 350 target, you know, which people would have been insane to even think we had a chance of any of that 18 months before. And it was great, you know, when we had this huge church service in the middle of town that Desmond Tutu preached at the cathedral, and then they rang the bell 350 times, and then thousands of churches across Europe did the same thing at the same time, and you know, on and on. It was the wrong 117 nations. It was poor and most vulnerable nations. And, you know, we haven't built the political pressure yet in the richest, most addicted, most powerful places, most of all here. And that means we have, I think, since can't think of any other way, I think we have no choice but to keep trying to build these movements. October 10th this year, we're having this huge, not a political rally, a global work party all over the world. 10. There'll be thousands of people putting up solar panels, building community gardens, laying out bike paths, whatever. The message is not that we can solve climate change one project at a time, though all those things will be useful. We can't. We can only solve it if we get a law that puts a price on carbon, fine. But the message will be from all that work party, if we can get to work, you better do it. If I can climb up on the roof of the school and pound in the solar panel, you can get up on the floor of the Senate and do your job, you know, pass legislation. That's what you're supposed to be doing.
But you talked about in the lead up to this presidential election, you got Obama and Clinton to sign on to 80% by 2050. What happened?
There are, you know, to his credit, Obama's done more than any, you know, all the presidents before him put together, though that bar was pretty low. The thing that they'll agree to, if they agree to anything in the Senate this year, will at least nominally point us in the direction of 80% cuts by 2050. It's just not enough anymore. You know, we need considerably more change faster. What happened is just that it's, you know, we're up against this is not some tangential part of, it's not like dealing with sulfur emissions or, you know, the Endangered Species Act or something. It's not something at the edge of the economy. This is the heart of the world's economy. Fossil fuel is the most important thing in the world. So it's no wonder that it's a little difficult. And, you know, frankly, it would be better if there was somebody other than me and, you know, sort of band of, you know, listless, wonderful people all over the world trying to do something about it. You know, we need more leadership than we've got, but we're doing what we can for the moment.
To talk about energy independence, President Obama is pushing nuclear power, offshore drilling, and coal.
Offshore, we just put up the thing of this. If you really want to talk about climate, you really can't do offshore drilling. I mean, we've got to keep what oil and coal is still in the ground. We've got to keep it there. You know? And we haven't managed to get that point across. And it may be escalating, you know. I mean, last spring at this time, with a few other people, I helped organize this first big mass civil disobedience in this country on climate change. And we had 5,000 people in DC, and that was enough to force the Congress to shut down their coal-fired power plant, you know, the one that they owned and that powered Capitol Hill. That was one down, 600 to go, you know. But we need that, we may need all kinds of tactics.
Nuclear power?
Nuclear power is less carbon than coal. I mean, a coal-fired power plant is the most dangerous thing in the world now because nothing has to go wrong. You operate it according to spec and it wrecks the world, okay? But nuclear power is not an important part of the answer to it. If for no other reason, quite aside from all the things that we all know about, it's too expensive to be an important player. It only happens with massive government subsidy. And if you're going to spend that money, there are dozens of things you can spend it on that get you more kilowatts per dollar. So it's only the existence of a huge nuclear lobby that even has us thinking about climate.
We're going to now open up the floor to questions and comments.
If I may, I would like to first serve our Tufts community by having students that are here identify themselves by raising their hands if they want to ask a question. And I'll take Althea.
Thank you very much for the interview. It's been great. I'm wondering, just you were ending there.
Louder, please.
Sure. You were ending there talking about civil disobedience and the role of civil disobedience in the movement that you're building. And I'm wondering if you can actually talk a little bit about tactics and strategies that you see. The tactics and strategies that you see as, I guess, changing what you've done as far as awareness building and political participation in the movement to actually creating the pressure that will
sort of turn that energy into political pressure, or I guess into change, if that's legal change or otherwise, that you see as really being essential? And then a little bit more about what you see as the role of civil disobedience in the movement.
So here's what has to happen, okay? We somehow have to get the Senate, Washington, Beijing, Delhi, the UN, a few key players to do one thing above all, which is to finally put a stiff price on carbon to reflect the damage it does in the atmosphere, okay? That's the only lever we've got to pull that's big enough to cause the kind of change we need in the time we have. So the question becomes, how do you do that? I mean, we're not going to shut down coal-fired power plants one by one around the world. Even if we could do it in this country, we're clearly not going to be able to do it in China that way, We organized really well in China. We had 300 demonstrations there, but we were pushing the envelope. One of them got busted up by the police. The other ones figured out how to walk up to the line and not go over. So we need a strategy of whatever we're doing that raises that kind of political pressure. Civil disobedience may well need to be more of a part of that. One of the things we're looking at right now around this country is that there are 60 or so campuses that have coal-fired power plants on campus providing their power, okay? Those are, like the one that Congress ran, relatively soft targets, good ways to kind of raise awareness and get the idea that coal is dangerous deeply into the debate, In
What's
fact,
the alternative?
on 10-10-10 on this day, lots of people are putting up solar panels and things, but we're also making sure that there are some people whose work for the Global Work Party is sitting in front of coal-fired power plants and doing things like that. It needs to be a very large. It needs to be a kind of movement that people can buy into in many different ways, and including, but definitely not limited to being a kind of on the hairy edge of activism. I was arrested in the first civil disobedience of any kind about climate in this country about 10 years ago. And the only reason I was because my old friend who just died, Granny D, this great woman who walked across America, she'd asked me to come and, I'm a good Sunday school teacher. If someone who's 93 tells me to do something, I do it. And but I remember it was just like 10 of us. We were in the rotunda of the Capitol with a sign, stop global warming, stop campaign contributions from global warmers. Closer than they wish you to exercise your First Amendment rights. And we were, so they handcuffed Granny D and I together, which was very funny because she's like 4'4". And she looked up at me, I'm 93, I've never been arrested before, I should have started long ago. I've always remembered, We'll see. And boy, I hope a lot of people come up with good ideas and strategies for this.
Thanks very much, Althea. Let me see if there's a local resident from Medford or Somerville that's come to campus. Please, sir, if you would identify.
I've been a Massachusetts resident since 2006. And I've been part of many demonstrations. In fact, I was active in the Spring Mobilization Committees during the war in Vietnam. I was an assistant to one of the King's assistants. We mobilized about almost 500,000 people at the UN. I will continue to participate in demonstrations as long as I'm alive. My 75th birthday was in October. But since 1960, in addition to that, I feel that we need a class alternative. And that is the only way. We must build a political alternative to the ruling class. And the election of Barack Obama was the biggest political sucker trap in world history. He recommended the same thing that Bush does, with a different tactic. If this was 1850 when slavery was legal, I'm not going to vote for someone that wants to reform slavery, make it so the slave has only be slave once a month or something like that. I'm against all slavery. So I'm against the whole system which profits in front of people worldwide.
Yes.
And so this is a government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich, from George Washington to Barack Obama. And it doesn't matter what individual wins. If someone tries to punch with a fist, you don't hold out fingers. We must build a class alternative of the working class.
Would you please do us a
And that's it.
You don't want to ask a
Oh,
question?
yes.
If you would ask a question of Bill,
So yes, and I'm a great admirer of things that both of you have done. My wife and I are great fans of Goodman, this is Democracy Now! A lot, and I probably will buy one of your books, and I wish you to be a great person. But I'd like to ask you, why can't we work to build a political alternative to both capitalist parties, the Democratic and Republican Party, a working class alternative?
So here's my thinking on this, and in some ways it's, I'm afraid, even more radical than what you're describing. And in some ways, radical is not the right word. In some ways it's profoundly more conservative, too. I continued beyond organizing to actually try to do a little sort of thinking and writing still, too. I got a new book coming out in a couple of weeks. And one of the things I've come to think is that the most profound structural problem we face at this point, or at least the one that's the easiest to sort of get a handle on in a way, is scale. That we have engineered not just banks that are too big to fail, but an entire world system that's too big to fail. And that the radical alternative is to begin figuring out very quickly how to get things down to a scale, a local scale, where we can get capitalism under some kind of control. I don't think that personally, I don't think the sort of alternative, the sort of 20th century alternative of a big centrally planned economy, Soviet-style economy, whatever, is attractive in the least. I do think that the alternative, of a very localized economy in food, in energy, in culture, in all kinds of things, is extremely attractive in a world now where we can connect all those places, all those localities in a way that we couldn't even 5 or 10 years ago. And that's one of the reasons that kind of distributed, it's just true of, it's what we need to do with energy. We need to, and oddly, I think that the key thing about getting there, the single most important thing, is this exact same question of putting a serious price on carbon. I think that the centralizing force in the world for the last 200 years, the thing that explains more than anything else why our world looks like what it looks like, has been the endless availability of cheap fossil fuel. And that explains concentrations of power in profound ways. It explains gross inequities in wealth around the world. And that the day that we change that is the day that we suddenly have the economic force of gravity working for people instead of for power. And that's, I think it'll come with myriad traumas and benefits as we move in that direction. That's just my sense.
Your book, the next book, is called Earth.
It's called, you have to pronounce it more like as if you were like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's spelled E-A-A-R-T-H, so Earth. And the argument is that we really have, yes, we really have changed the planet in profound ways. We can and must do what we can to keep climate change from getting any worse. But it's already, the one study that he's done estimates there's already 300,000 people a year dying from the effects of climate change. Seawater is 30% more acid than it used to be. We're not going back in that sense. And what it means is, on this new earth, we need a new set of habits. And the most important of these, I think, is to break with the idea that endless growth is how we're going to solve all our problems. And that's a dangerous and un-American thing to say, at some level. But I think it's true. People who, we were warned by people in this neck of the woods, MIT, 40 years ago now, that we were rapidly approaching something that they called limits to growth. Well, we've hit them, you look around, if you're melting the Arctic, it's a pretty good sign that things are getting past the point where we can just keep plunging ahead. We need to think hard about those habits, and that one's the most important. figuring out how to make stability the hallmark of our economy is a pretty challenging and pretty radical task.
I think you will recall that I said you were likely to be dissatisfied that you didn't have enough time with our guests and that you didn't have the individual personal time to ask them each questions. But we've made a commitment to Amy, who has to get back to New York tonight in order to take her show for tomorrow morning. Many of you are still in bed. I can tell you that's true in this room. But we're going to finish up now. And I'm going to ask you, after you give them your generous applause for being here, that you let them out of the room so that they can go to the book table where they would gladly sign a book that you purchased, if that's your choice. You may have the opportunity as well to talk with them then, but to honor that opportunity to have them move along safely.
Dale, I want to say one more thing.
Yes.
I want to say one more thing on the same sort of token. Again, I feel dumb sitting here, that I've been sitting here talking all this time, because Amy knows as much about organizing and activism as it's possible. I know you and David already talked some about this here, and it's worth looking at on the TV and the computer if you haven't seen it already. But thank you for all that
Well, thank
good
you
stuff.
very much, and to all my colleagues. And by the way, don't you have a radio station right here in this building, in Barnum? Does Taos have its own radio
It's
station?
now in Curtis, just down.
But I hope you all, there's flyers out there for Democracy Now!, so I hope you tune in and pass them out to your friends and let people know that there is a daily broadcast of a grassroots, global, unembedded, independent, international investigative news hour. That's how we do it.